The Associated Press spoke with the relatives of the ICE officer who fatally shot a 25-year-old man in Biddeford, Maine earlier this week. One ex-wife who spoke on the record claims he once threw boiling water at her while she was holding their child. His oldest daughter, who also spoke on the record, reported coming home from school and seeing her father, the officer, holding a gun to his head. An anonymous relative speaking to the AP said that he was extremely mentally ill and diagnosed with bipolar disorder and ADD. And additional court records document years of alleged physical and verbal abuse, including an allegation that he dragged another daughter around the house as she cried. Family members say he told them he shot the man in Biddeford, but that he was acting in self-defense. The AP reached out to the officer, but he did not respond. Without identifying the officer, an ICE spokesperson said the ICE officer in question has nearly a decade of federal law enforcement experience with required training, including use of force training. Back in February, an ICE whistleblower warned that the officer training program was broken and some of these officers would pose a, quote, clear and direct threat to everyone in this country. Joining us is that whistleblower, Ryan Schwenk. He formerly was a lawyer with ICE that was responsible for training new deportation officers. Alex Wagner is still with us. Ryan, thank you very much for joining us. Tell us what you saw in training.
So what I saw in training was a program that was cut dangerously short. We removed a significant portion of the training for officers that related to their use of force, to the legal standards they had to be held to their constitutional duties. And that training cut essentially removed a lot of the safeguards that would make the difference between an officer who can safely perform their duties and one who could potentially pose a serious danger to the public.
During training, what normally do you have to do to graduate, and what is not being done now?
So under the normal academy, they would go for a little over 500 hours of classes, and they would go through a number of academic and practical exams that would measure their ability to perform the duties of the job, both under pressure and measure their actual knowledge of the job as they're doing it. Those were largely stripped away. We stripped away most of the practical exercises that let us measure their performance under pressure. Exactly the same thing that happened in the shooting, and an officer was placed under pressure, and their response was inconsistent with what the agency would have expected.
You also talk about how the trainees were not being taught about the Constitution any longer. How exactly were they not being taught? What are they missing?
So the training program removed most of the bedrock elements that tied the job of being a federal law enforcement officer to their duties to the Constitution. That is, the connection between their oath of office, their duty to the public, the limitations on their statutory authority, and the role of the First Amendment, for instance, their relationship and interactions with protesters or the public at large when they're conducting an arrest. We also had significant issues with their understanding of search and seizure because we were taught to teach them that they could enter a home without a judicial warrant.
When you hear about what happened in Biddeford, Maine, and you hear about the record that this officer had according to his family, the record of violence, they say he's bipolar, does it surprise you that somebody like that would be employed at ICE?
Yes. I don't think any law enforcement agency in the country would look at a psychiatric profile that you're describing and think this is an individual who's qualified to serve.
Would they have access to that testimony, those records? There are police records documenting the allegations.
Whether they had access to them is largely a result of whether or not they were found during the background search that was supposed to be conducted. Anyone who serves in the federal government is supposed to go through a thorough background check. We're supposed to have your credit record checked, your criminal history checked. Everything is supposed to be disclosed, including arrests, not simply convictions. So yes, in theory, they should have known about it. Whether he disclosed it and whether they found it independently in their research is an open question. So then we won't know until those records are made public by the agency, if ever.
Alex, the video itself and the what happened in Biddeford was hard enough. The father not being even the subject that they were looking for, getting shot, the DHS story changing from he was using his car as a weapon to trying to flee. Now to put on top of that all of these allegations that are being made on the record by his family members, daughters, daughter, ex-wife. Why are we not hearing more from this administration regarding this man and regarding what happened? Why are we not hearing from them? This was a disgusting oversight, and we will make it right. We will ensure that our background checks are more thorough. We will ensure that our training is more thorough, so a mistake like this never happens again.
I mean, we have heard from the administration. We heard from the president, who said the day after ICE effectively curtailed its policy of traffic stops, President Trump expressed his disbelief and dismay that ICE would do anything to try and ameliorate the situation or prevent any future accidents or killings like that from happening. That is the point. That is the message from the administration. Violence is the point. You know, I was speaking this week for my podcast, Runaway Country, with Juan Proaño, who's the CEO of LULAC, and he said they are hunting Latin American men. They are hunting Latino men. According to, I mean, we don't have a lot of stats on this, but from what they can glean, 80% of the people in detention are Latino men. And once they're in detention, the conditions there, I spoke to Melissa Shepard from Immigration Defenders, the conditions inside these detention centers is so abominable. People are not given enough food. They are not given clean water. Some of them are committing suicide. The conditions are purposefully so to encourage self-deportation. I mean, rule of law is not the goal here, Katie. Making life terrifying and making communities fearful enough that they either shut themselves off or go back home is the point here. I mean, that's why they don't want to make ICE detentions more sane or more targeted or more safe. The instilling fear and the threat of violence is the essence of the policy of this administration. So we should not hold out any hope that they're going to try and fix the system. I mean, all of this, which we see as collateral damage, is in fact the focus. Recruit as many people as you can. Who cares what their backgrounds are? Just use them as effectively, like our guest earlier in this hour, Stuart Stevens, says, as part of a roving death squad to make life hell for black and brown people in this country. That is the point. That is the immigration policy of the Trump administration.
Ryan, you had said that after you left, you said you can't emphasize enough that what's coming down the road from what you saw at the academy is a clear and direct threat to everyone in this country. Do you expect more situations like Biddeford, Maine?
Yes, I do, unfortunately. I would love to say otherwise, but the fact of the matter is the agency graduated hundreds, if not thousands, of cadets through a program that was deficient. And even if they go back through and try to ameliorate that or correct it with additional training, the fact of the matter is once you set a pattern in someone's mind, a response pattern or a practice, it is much more difficult to untrain it than it was to train it in the first place. And they trained a lot of officers who don't have the right training to know when to use their firearm, when they're authorized to use it, when it's safe to use it, when it's safe in terms of the public, other officers, or the person they're pointing it at. And I fully expect that, unfortunately, we will see other incidents like what we saw in Biddeford, Maine, and what we saw in Houston.